There comes a point in life when you start questioning why you're constantly trying to win approval from people who barely understand themselves. We dress a certain way, speak a certain way, live a certain way not because it feels right to us, but because we think it'll make others like us. But here's the hard truth. The people you're bending over backward to impress are still trying to figure out who they are. They're struggling with their own identity, doubts, insecurities, and fears. And yet, we let their opinions shape the direction of our lives. We often find ourselves bending, shaping, and adjusting who we are just to fit into someone else's idea of success or beauty or strength. But here's something we rarely stop to consider. The people we're trying so hard to impress, they don't even know who they really are. They're not living from a place of clarity or peace. Most of them are just as confused, just as insecure, and just as uncertain as we are. But because they wear their confidence louder, we assume they have it all figured out. So we give them the power to decide our worth. Think about it, how many people in your life are truly living as their most honest self? How many are acting out of pressure, out of pain, out of habit? We see someone who seems bold and popular, so we try to become like them. But what we don't see is the mask they wear when no one's watching. The anxiety that hits them in the silence, the doubt that creeps in after the applause fades. We try to impress people who are wearing a mask and we start putting on one of our own. It becomes a cycle. They're not being real, we're not being real, and no one's truly connected. When you're trying to impress someone who is still searching for their own identity, you end up playing a game with rules that keep changing. One moment they admire confidence, the next they crave humility. One moment they celebrate ambition, the next they shame it. And all the while you're stuck, trying to keep up, never knowing who you're supposed to be. The tragedy is that in chasing their approval, you begin to abandon your own voice. Your uniqueness gets diluted. You stop asking, what feels right to me, and start asking, will they like this? But what if you didn't need their applause? What if you stopped chasing people who don't even know where they're going? What if instead you started uncovering your truth? When you realize that most people are still wearing masks, it frees you from the need to wear your own. Because the goal isn't to impress, the goal is to be real. And in a world full of performers, being real is what truly makes you powerful. We often find ourselves bending, shaping, and adjusting who we are just to fit into someone else's idea of success or beauty or strength. But here's something we rarely stop to consider. The people we're trying so hard to impress, they don't even know who they really are. They're not living from a place of clarity or peace. Most of them are just as confused, just as insecure, and just as uncertain as we are. But because they wear their confidence louder, we assume they have it all figured out. So we give them the power to decide our worth. Think about it, how many people in your life are truly living as their most honest self? How many are acting out of pressure, out of pain, out of habit? We see someone who seems bold and popular, so we try to become like them. But what we don't see is the mask they wear when no one's watching. The anxiety that hits them in the silence, the doubt that creeps in after the applause fades. We try to impress people who are wearing a mask, and we start putting on one of our own. It becomes a cycle. They're not being real, we're not being real, and no one's truly connected. When you're trying to impress someone who is still searching for their own identity, you end up playing a game with rules that keep changing. One moment they admire confidence, the next they crave humility. One moment they celebrate ambition, the next they shame it. And all the while you're stuck, trying to keep up, never knowing who you're supposed to be. The tragedy is that in chasing their approval, you begin to abandon your own voice. Your uniqueness gets diluted. You stop asking, what feels right to me? and start asking, will they like this? But what if you didn't need their applause? What if you stopped chasing people who don't even know where they're going? What if instead you started uncovering your truth? When you realize that most people are still wearing masks, it frees you from the need to wear your own. Because the goal isn't to impress, the goal is to be real. And in a world full of performers, being real is what truly makes you powerful. We live in a time where external validation feels like oxygen. A like, a compliment, a nod of approval, they give us a momentary high, like a rush of adrenaline. For a few seconds, we feel seen, appreciated, valued. But what happens when that approval fades? What happens when the applause stops? The silence becomes deafening, the emptiness creeps in, and we start chasing the next validation hit, hoping it will last longer than the last. But it never does. That's because no amount of external praise can heal what's unsettled within. We think, if they just recognize me, if they just see my worth, I'll finally feel whole. But even when they do, the peace is temporary. It's like pouring water into a bucket full of holes. No matter how much you add, it keeps leaking out. You feel good for a moment, but then the doubt returns. The question resurfaces, am I really enough? The truth is, validation from others is a reflection, not a foundation. It shows you how others see you, but it doesn't define who you are. When you depend on it, you give away your power. You allow strangers, followers, co-workers, or even family to become the judge of your worth. And that's dangerous because their opinions are unstable. They change with moods, trends, and circumstances. If you live for their praise, you'll die from their criticism. The shift happens when you start to validate yourself. When you stop waiting for someone else to say you matter and start saying it to yourself, you begin to do things not because they'll be applauded, but because they're aligned with your values, your vision, your truth. That's where real confidence lives, not in the echo of claps, but in the quiet knowing that you are enough, even in silence. When you no longer need external validation to feel whole, you become unshakable. You stop performing, you stop pleasing, you start living fully, freely, and fearlessly, because the peace you feel inside becomes greater than the noise outside. And that's when you realize you were never meant to be liked by everyone. You were meant to be loved by the right ones, starting with yourself. It's easy to forget that most people aren't responding to you, they're reacting from their own experiences, wounds, and conditioning. What someone thinks of you often has very little to do with who you actually are and everything to do with what they've been through. Their opinions are not facts, they're projections, mirrors of their fears, filters of their past, shadows of their pain. But we take those projections and absorb them as truth. We let them shape our identity, direct our choices, and influence our self-worth. Imagine someone who never felt supported growing up. When they see you being bold, taking risks, or speaking your truth, it might make them uncomfortable, not because you're doing something wrong, but because they were taught to stay quiet and small. So they might call you arrogant, dramatic, or unrealistic. And suddenly you begin shrinking yourself to fit into their comfort zone. But the issue isn't your light, it's that they were never taught how to handle brightness. Every judgment someone makes about you is rooted in their perspective, not your potential. Yet we often treat their words like gospel. One harsh comment can echo in our mind for days. One dismissive glance can make us question years of growth. We give away our peace to people who haven't earned our trust, simply because they spoke with confidence. But confidence isn't clarity, loudness isn't truth, and projection isn't wisdom. When you start recognizing that most opinions are just echoes of someone else's experience, you begin to detach. You stop internalizing what was never meant to be yours. You start protecting your energy, your vision, your self-belief. You weren't put here to fit into someone else's unresolved story. You're here to write your own, and that means not letting the noise of others drown out the whisper of your own intuition. When someone criticizes you, pause and ask, is this about me or is this about them? That one question can save you from years of unnecessary self-doubt, because the truth is, most people are too caught up in their own inner battles to see you clearly. And when you stop letting their projections define your path, you finally begin to walk in your own truth, grounded, authentic, and free. When someone gives you an opinion about your life, your choices, or your dreams, it's easy to take it personally. But what if their words have nothing to do with you and everything to do with them? What if their judgment is simply a reflection of their own pain, limitations, or fears? We often mistake people's projections for truth. But in reality, they're not seeing you, they're seeing their version of you through the lens of their own story. If someone has failed to chase their own dreams, they might call yours unrealistic. If someone has lived their life in fear, they might see your courage as recklessness. If someone is uncomfortable with change, they might label your growth as betrayal. This is what projections do. They distort reality. They turn someone's internal struggle into an external opinion. And when we accept those opinions without questioning them, we end up living a life designed by someone else's insecurities. You start doubting your instincts because someone told you they weren't practical. You delay your dreams because someone said you should be more realistic. You silence your voice because someone called you too much. But none of those labels belong to you. They're baggage from someone else's journey. And the more you carry it, the further you drift from your true path. The moment you realize this, something shifts. You begin to observe instead of absorb. You listen, but you don't personalize. You understand that people speak from where they are, not always from what's real. Their vision is shaped by their wounds. Their advice is filtered through their own fears. And that's okay, they're allowed to have their perspective. But you don't have to build your life on it. Protect your space. Guard your mind, and when someone projects their doubt onto your dream, respond with compassion not for them, but for yourself. Because it takes strength to stay true to your path when the world keeps handing you maps that lead somewhere else. You don't need everyone to understand you. You just need to understand yourself. And once you stop letting projections shape your identity, you start living from a place that's rooted in truth, not perception. That's where freedom begins. Every time you change a little piece of yourself to win someone's approval, you're slowly drifting away from who you really are. It's so subtle we barely notice it. We tweak our personality in one room, filter our emotions in another, and dim our light somewhere else. All in the name of being liked. We think we're being adaptable. We call it being easygoing or fitting in. But deep down we're performing, and every performance has a cost. Your authenticity. The more we chase approval, the more we lose clarity. You begin to forget what excites you. You doubt your gut feelings, you second. Guess your passions. Why? Because you're so used to making decisions based on other people's preferences that your own voice becomes unrecognizable. Instead of asking, what do I want? You start asking, what would make them happy? And when your life becomes a series of performances, the line between truth and act begins to blur. We've been conditioned to think that being liked means we're successful, lovable, worthy. But being liked is not the same as being valued. People might like the version of you that entertains them, serves them, or never disagrees with them. But that version isn't complete, it's edited. And living like that is exhausting. Because every time you wear a mask, you carry the weight of pretending. And pretending, no matter how good you are at it, always takes something away from your soul. When you stop chasing approval, you start gaining time, energy, and emotional freedom. You begin to make choices from alignment, not fear. You say yes when you mean yes, and no without guilt. You speak not to please, but to express. You dress for yourself. You show up as yourself. And suddenly, life feels lighter not because it's easier, but because it's real. Approval is addictive, but authenticity is healing. You weren't born to be liked by everyone. You were born to live with meaning, with purpose, with truth. The ones who matter will stay, not because you impressed them, but because they saw your real self and chose to stay anyway. That's connection, that's freedom, that's where peace begins. We spend so much of our lives thinking that if we just impress people enough, they'll love us. That if we show them the best version, the polished, filtered, curated version, will be accepted, celebrated, and finally feel like we belong. But the truth is, people don't connect with perfection. They connect with vulnerability, with truth, with something real, and the more we try to impress, the more we actually create distance between ourselves and others, because no one can relate to a performance, they relate to presence. Think about it. When someone shares their struggles, their doubts, their imperfect journey, something inside us softens. We lean in, we feel seen, we realize we're not alone. But when someone only shows their highlight reel, we admire them from a distance, but we don't feel close to them. We don't feel with them. That's the difference between impressing and connecting. One builds a pedestal, the other builds a bridge. When we stop performing and start showing up as we are messy, learning, growing, we give others permission to do the same. And suddenly, the walls come down, the pressure lifts. We're no longer trying to be enough. We simply are. That's where real relationships grow. That's where love deepens. That's where we find our people, not the ones who stay for the show, but the ones who stay when the lights go off. The irony is, the more real you become, the more magnetic you are. Not because everyone will like you, they won't, but because the right ones will see you. They'll recognize something honest in you, something that reminds them of themselves. And that connection is worth more than 1,000 people clapping for your act. You were never meant to spend your life editing yourself to fit into someone else's expectations. You were meant to live unfiltered, to speak with your true voice, to walk your path, not someone else's. The right people will find you not because you impressed them, but because your authenticity resonated. And that's a deeper kind of success. One that doesn't fade when the applause stops, but one that grows stronger with every honest moment you choose. At some point, we have to stop running in circles, chasing the approval of people who are still figuring out who they are. We have to stop shrinking ourselves to fit into molds that were never made for us. The truth is, most of the people we try to impress are too distracted by their own doubts, fears, and performances to truly see us, not because we aren't enough, but because they aren't looking with clarity. When we let go of the need to be liked by everyone, we make space to love ourselves. When we stop waiting for others to recognize our worth, we begin to embody it. And when we stop performing and start being, we don't just attract attention, we create connection. Real, deep, lasting connection. You don't need to change who you are to fit into someone else's story. You need to honor your own. Because the peace you're searching for, the belonging you crave, and the confidence you're chasing, they all begin the moment you decide to stop impressing and start expressing. The moment you choose to live aligned with your values, not their expectations. In a world full of masks, your truth is your power. And when you choose to live from that place unfiltered, unapologetic, and authentic, you not only set yourself free, you inspire others to do the same. That's how real change begins, not with applause, but with honesty, not with perfection, but with presence, and not with trying to be someone else, but with the courage to be fully, completely, and beautifully you.